The forest floor cracked beneath their boots as the forensic team made their way through Danville's Huron National Forest. It was October 2019, nearly 50 years since anyone had meaningful answers about what happened here. The team carried the latest ground-penetrating radar equipment, a technology that didn't exist when Robert Walsh and James Moore vanished without a trace in December 1972. "We've got something," called out Dr. Samantha Reeves, the lead forensic archaeologist. Her voice carried an unusual edge. After 15 years investigating cold cases, very little fazed her anymore. But this was different. The radar had picked up an anomaly 6 feet beneath the surface. As team members carefully removed decades of accumulated soil and vegetation, Detective Marcus Holloway stood back, watching. He'd inherited this cold case from his mentor, who had inherited it from his. 3 generations of detectives had tried and failed to solve the mystery of the vanished hunters. "I don't think you're going to believe this," Dr. Reeves said, her voice barely above a whisper. There, nestled in the dirt, lay the first physical evidence they'd recovered in nearly 5 decades of searching. A tarnished hunting rifle, and beside it, a single brass shell casing. But it was what they found next that caused even the most seasoned investigators to fall silent. The truth had been buried here all along, and it wasn't what anyone expected. Before I reveal what these investigators uncovered in the frozen Danville wilderness, a discovery that would rewrite the narrative of a 47-year-old disappearance, make sure you're subscribed to Revealed Crime Cases and hit that notification bell. This story exposes how a single piece of forgotten hunting gear finally solved one of America's most baffling cold cases. The disappearance of Walsh and Moore had haunted Crawford County for half a century. 2 experienced hunters who simply vanished during a snowstorm, leaving behind families who never stopped searching. What happened to them? Was it an accident? Did they get lost? Or was something far more sinister at play? For decades, these questions tormented Margaret Walsh, who spent her life savings trying to find her husband, and Willie Moore, who drove the forest roads every single weekend for nearly 50 years, searching for his brother. What the forensic team discovered that autumn day in 2019 would finally provide answers, but those answers would shock everyone involved with the case. The truth had been literally buried for decades, and what that single shell casing revealed would turn everything investigators thought they knew completely upside down. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments below. I love seeing how our true crime community spans the globe, connected by our shared pursuit of justice and truth, even when that truth takes half a century to uncover. As the team members carefully documented their discovery, they had no idea they were about to crack open a case that would change how cold case investigations are conducted throughout America. December 17, 1972, dawned bitter cold in Danville, Michigan. The small logging town nestled on the eastern edge of Huron National Forest had already endured 3 major snowstorms that month. Weather reports warned of another approaching system, this one potentially the worst of the season. Most locals knew better than to venture far from home when Mother Nature flexed her muscles this way. Danville in the early 70s was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. A blue-collar community of roughly 2,000 residents, it thrived on timber, hunting tourism, and a small manufacturing plant that produced auto parts. Main Street featured Harley's General Store, the Pine Cone Diner, and Thompson's Hardware, where hunters typically stocked up before heading into the woods. During deer season, the town's population would temporarily swell with visitors from Detroit and other cities, all hoping to bag a buck in the dense Michigan wilderness. Robert Bobby Walsh, 42, was a respected figure in Danville. A Vietnam veteran who'd served 2 tours as an Army Ranger, he'd returned home with a Purple Heart and a determination to live a quiet life. He worked as a foreman at the local lumber mill, where his fair management style earned him the loyalty of his crew. Bobby had married his high school sweetheart, Margaret, and together they had raised 2 daughters, now in their late teens. His friends described him as methodical and cautious, skills honed during his military service. James Jimmy Moore, 38, was Bobby's brother-in-law and hunting partner for over 15 years. A mechanic by trade, Jimmy owned Moore's Auto Repair on the edge of town. Where Bobby was reserved, Jimmy was outgoing, known for his booming laugh and endless supply of jokes. He'd never married, instead devoting himself to caring for his widowed mother and coaching the local high school baseball team. His younger brother, Willie, often tagged along on hunting trips. But that December, Willie was home with a broken ankle. Both men were experienced woodsmen who had hunted the Huron National Forest since boyhood. They knew the terrain intimately, or at least they thought they did. Their plan was straightforward. They would drive Bobby's 1968 Ford pickup to the northeastern section of the forest, an area locals called the Ridge. Though deer season had officially ended 2 weeks earlier, they had special permits for late-season hunting. They planned to set up camp at Miller's Creek, spend 2 nights tracking a buck Bobby had spotted the previous month, and return home by Tuesday evening, December 19th. Margaret Walsh packed extra supplies, concerned about the weather forecast. "Maybe wait until after Christmas," she suggested as Bobby loaded his gear into the truck around 5:30 a.m. "We'll be fine," Bobby assured her. What began as light snowfall quickly transformed into a blizzard that dropped nearly 2 feet of snow in less than 24 hours. Sunday hunting without success. Winds gusted to 50 miles per hour, according to the timeline creating whiteout conditions and temperatures that plunged deeper into the forest on Monday morning. By Tuesday evening, just as the predicted storm arrived, no way to reach them by their radio, which had limited range in the best conditions. Margaret Walsh called Sheriff Tom Dennison. Initially, the sheriff wasn't overly concerned. "Probably just waiting out the storm," he told her. "Bobby's too smart to travel in this mess." But by Wednesday morning, with still no word, Margaret's worry had become unbearable. When Bobby's truck was found parked at their designated entry point with a thin layer of snow covering it, Sheriff Dennison launched the first search party. 6 deputies and 12 volunteers from town, many of them mill workers who had served with Bobby. The problem wasn't just the snow, recalled Deputy Carl Franklin, now retired. It was that the storm had completely transformed the landscape. Landmarks were buried, trails were gone. We were essentially searching a blank white canvas. The initial search lasted 14 hours before darkness and dangerous temperatures forced them back. Thursday brought slightly better weather and a significantly larger response. 38 local volunteers, a team from the state police, and 3 handlers with tracking dogs from a neighboring county. The community mobilized with remarkable speed. The Pine Cone Diner became search headquarters, serving hot meals around the clock. Local businesses donated supplies, everything from extra flashlights to snowshoes. Teenagers distributed flyers with maps of search zones. The local radio station, WDNV, interrupted regular programming with hourly updates. By Friday, December 22nd, the search had expanded to include a National Guard helicopter and additional teams from surrounding counties. The dogs had initially picked up a scent trail leading northwest from the truck, but lost it after approximately 2 miles, likely due to the heavy snowfall. "I remember standing in the forest that Friday," Margaret Walsh would later tell reporters on the 10th anniversary of the disappearance. "It was so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. I called their names until my voice gave out. The forest never answered back." As Christmas approached, hope dimmed. The search continued, but with each passing day, the chances of finding Walsh and Moore alive decreased dramatically. Experts estimated that even experienced outdoorsmen would struggle to survive more than 72 hours in such extreme conditions without proper shelter. Yet something didn't add up. Their tent, sleeping bags, and emergency supplies were missing from the truck, indicating they had established a camp somewhere. But where? And why couldn't the increasingly sophisticated search efforts locate it? By December 31st, the official search was scaled back, though volunteers, particularly family members, continued looking well into the new year. What no one realized then was that they were at the beginning of a mystery that would span nearly 5 decades. Those were the last words she would hear from her husband. The first 72 hours after a disappearance are critical, a fact Sheriff Tom Dennison knew all too well. By hour 48, the search for Walsh and Moore had evolved from a rescue mission into something far more complex. The sheriff's office coordinated with state police to establish a grid system covering over 20 square miles of forest. Teams methodically worked through each quadrant, marking areas as they were cleared. "We were fighting both time and terrain," recalled Deputy Franklin. "The forest doesn't give up its secrets easily, especially after a storm like that." The search effort grew to include 14 state police officers, the entire Crawford County Sheriff's Department, 9 deputies, 42 local volunteers, many with hunting experience, 6 trained tracking dogs, 2 National Guard helicopters equipped with thermal imaging, primitive by today's standards, 3 wilderness survival experts flown in from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. The men's abandoned Ford pickup became the focal point of the investigation. Forensic techniques were limited in 1972, but investigators meticulously documented everything about the vehicle. The keys were still in the ignition. Their extra clothing remained neatly packed in duffel bags in the truck bed. A half-empty thermos of coffee had frozen solid. There was no sign of struggle or violence. Most puzzling was what wasn't in the truck: their rifles, ammunition, emergency packs, tent, and sleeping bags. These items suggested they had established a camp somewhere, yet days of searching yielded no trace of such a site. "It was as if they had set up camp and then it just vanished," said Sheriff Dennison in his first press conference, 3 days after the disappearance. The last confirmed sighting of Walsh and Moore came from Harley Thompson, owner of the general store. They had stopped in around 6:15 a.m. on Sunday to purchase additional ammunition and coffee. Thompson noted nothing unusual about their demeanor. They were in good spirits, talking about the buck Bobby had seen last time. Normal as could be. As the investigation expanded, 3 primary theories emerged. The first and most straightforward was a tragic accident. Perhaps the men had become disoriented in the storm, wandered too far from camp, and succumbed to hypothermia. Yet this theory had significant holes. Both men were experienced outdoorsmen who knew the dangers of the forest intimately. More importantly, no bodies were found despite the extensive search. The second theory suggested voluntary disappearance. Perhaps one or both men had reasons to vanish. Financial troubles, marital problems, criminal connections. Investigators discreetly probed these possibilities, examining bank records and interviewing family members. They found nothing suspicious. Bobby Walsh had recently received a promotion. Jimmy Moore had just invested in new equipment for his garage. Both men were deeply rooted in the community with no signs of planning to leave. The third theory, foul play, initially seemed least likely, but gained traction as the search continued without results. Had they encountered someone dangerous in the woods? A poacher? A fugitive? The discovery of a small marijuana growing operation about 5 miles from their truck added a new dimension to this theory, though no direct connection was ever established. Media coverage escalated rapidly. What began as a local story in the Danville Gazette quickly caught the attention of Detroit newspapers. By the end of December, the case had been featured on regional television news and mentioned briefly in national broadcasts. The headlines grew increasingly dramatic. Hunters vanish in Danville blizzard. Search for missing veterans continues. Mystery in the woods. Where are Walsh and Moore? The public reaction was immediate and heartfelt. Donations poured in to support the search efforts and the families. Letters arrived from across the country offering prayers, support, and occasionally, wild theories. Psychics contacted the sheriff's office claiming visions of the men's whereabouts, none of which led anywhere. Local residents, meanwhile, were divided between concern and fear. Some worried that whatever had happened to Walsh and Moore might threaten others. Hunting license applications dropped significantly the following season. People were afraid, Margaret Walsh later recalled. Not just for Bobby and Jimmy, but for themselves. If 2 men who knew those woods like the back of their hands could vanish, what did that mean for everyone else? As December turned to January and the brutal Michigan winter tightened its grip, the investigation faced a harsh reality. The chances of finding Walsh and Moore alive had dwindled to almost nothing. Yet Sheriff Dennison refused to downgrade the search. "We don't leave our own out there," he told reporters, a sentiment that resonated deeply in the tight-knit community. Little did he know that this case would remain open on his desk until his retirement 15 years later, and would continue to haunt the department for decades to come. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Each like signals to YouTube that this is content worth sharing and helps ensure these forgotten cases reach more viewers who care about uncovering the truth. What the investigators couldn't possibly know then was that they were looking in entirely the wrong direction. As the official search scaled back in early 1973, two figures emerged as the driving forces behind the continued hunt for answers: Margaret Walsh and Willie Moore. Their unwavering determination would span decades, reshaping their lives and the community around them. Margaret Walsh, at 39, found herself suddenly alone with two teenage daughters and a future nothing had prepared her for. Friends described the transformation as immediate. The quiet homemaker became a relentless advocate overnight. "I'm not a widow," she would correct anyone who mistakenly used the term. "I'm the wife of a missing man." Within 3 months of the disappearance, Margaret had liquidated their savings account and taken a second mortgage on their home to hire Blackwell Investigations, a Detroit-based firm specializing in missing persons. For 2 years, their agents conducted independent searches, interviewed witnesses the police might have missed, and explored leads across 3 states. The cost was staggering, nearly $45,000 by 1975, equivalent to over $200,000 today. When the money ran out, Margaret took on additional work. Mornings at the local elementary school as a secretary, evenings waiting tables at the Pine Cone Diner, weekends selling handmade quilts at regional craft fairs. Every spare dollar went toward finding Bobby. "She never bought herself anything," recalled her daughter Susan in a 2010 interview. "Not clothes, not a better car when her old Chevy barely ran, nothing. Every penny that wasn't absolutely necessary for keeping us fed and housed went into the search fund." Meanwhile, Willie Moore channeled his grief differently. Every Saturday morning for 47 years, in blizzards, heat waves, and everything between, he drove his truck to the forest where his brother vanished. He would park near where Bobby's pickup had been found, unfold a map marked with colored pins representing areas he'd already searched, and spend the day methodically covering new ground. "People thought I was crazy," Willie admitted years later. "Maybe I was. But what else could I do? He was my brother. You don't give up on family." Local hunters grew accustomed to encountering Willie in the most remote parts of the forest. Some avoided him, unsettled by his single-minded purpose. Others joined him occasionally, forming impromptu search parties during the off-season. The forest rangers kept a special eye out for his ancient blue Dodge, sometimes bringing him coffee or sandwiches when they crossed paths. The disappearance created rippling effects throughout the extended families. Holiday gatherings became subdued affairs, marked by empty chairs nobody acknowledged. Bobby's father suffered a fatal heart attack 6 months after his son vanished. "Died of a broken heart," neighbors said. Jimmy's mother developed severe anxiety that eventually confined her to her home. The community, too, felt the weight of the mystery. Danville had always prided itself on being safe, a place where people looked out for each other. The vanishing of Walsh and Moore shattered that perception of security. "It was like a dark cloud settled over the town," said Reverend Michael Thomas, who served at Danville First Baptist for 30 years. "Not just sadness, but fear. If these men could disappear without a trace, was anyone truly safe?" Perhaps most devastating was the psychological toll of ambiguous loss, grief without confirmation or closure. Unlike death, where mourning follows a natural progression toward acceptance, the families of Walsh and Moore existed in painful limbo. "The hardest part is the not knowing," Margaret confessed during a rare newspaper interview on the 25th anniversary of the disappearance. "Your mind creates 1,000 different scenarios, each worse than the last. You imagine them hurt, calling for help. You imagine them trying to find their way home. You imagine terrible things I won't even speak aloud. And you never stop imagining, because without answers, the nightmare never ends." Despite the decades of searching, Margaret never moved from the home she had shared with Bobby. His clothes remained in the closet. His favorite chair sat empty in the living room. She kept his hunting license renewed every year. Just in case, she would say. Willie never married, explaining simply, "I made a promise to find Jimmy. Everything else had to wait." What time is it where you're watching? Our true crime community spans the globe, united by our shared quest for justice. Drop the time and your location in the comments. I'm always amazed at how these stories connect people across different time zones, all watching at different hours but joined by the same questions. What happened to these men? And will the truth ever come to light? As the years passed and technology advanced, both Margaret and Willie clung to hope that new methods might finally reveal what the forest had kept hidden for so long. As the calendar pages turned from months to years to decades, the disappearance of Walsh and Moore transformed from breaking news to local legend. The investigation evolved through distinct phases, each shaped by changing personnel, technological advancements, and investigative philosophies. By late 1973, the case had officially gone cold, a designation that devastated the families but reflected the reality of dwindling leads. Sheriff Dennison assigned Deputy Franklin to maintain the case file, reviewing evidence quarterly and following up on any new information. "We had a cardboard box," Franklin recalled in a 2015 interview. "Everything about Walsh and Moore fit in one box. Their lives, their disappearance, all our work, reduced to papers in a box that sat on a shelf in the evidence room. It never sat right with me." The first significant development came in 1977 when a hunter reported finding a weathered backpack approximately 7 miles from where the men's truck had been discovered. The excitement was short-lived. The backpack belonged to a hiker who had lost it 2 years earlier. This pattern would repeat throughout the decades, momentary hope followed by crushing disappointment. When Sheriff Dennison retired in 1988, the case passed to Sheriff Lyle Harrison, whose approach differed dramatically from his predecessors. Where Dennison had been methodical and conservative, Harrison embraced newer investigative techniques. "The old sheriff was a good man," Harrison said, "but he was stuck in the 1950s. This case needed fresh eyes and modern methods." Harrison's first action was to partner with the University of Michigan's newly established Forensic Anthropology Department. In the summer of 1989, 23 graduate students and 3 professors conducted an intensive 2-week search of a 3-square-mile area identified as high-probability terrain. They used early ground-penetrating radar, primitive by today's standards, and cadaver dogs trained specifically for detecting remains after extended periods. The university team discovered 8 previously unidentified animal burial sites, 2 abandoned hunter camps, and the foundation of a trapper's cabin dating to the 1930s, but nothing connected to Walsh and Moore. The 1990s brought computerization to rural police departments, allowing for better organization of evidence and cross-referencing with similar cases. Detective Sandra Murray, assigned to cold cases in 1994, digitized the Walsh-Moore file and discovered a pattern of hunter disappearances across the upper Midwest between 1965 and 1975. None perfectly matched the Danville case, but the analysis broadened investigators' perspectives. "We started thinking bigger," Murray explained. "Was this an isolated incident or part of something larger? Were there connections we'd missed because we were too focused on local angles?" This broader approach yielded a promising lead in 1996 when records revealed that Thomas Kendrick, a forest ranger who had participated in the original search, had later been convicted of armed robbery in Illinois. Investigators traveled to Joliet Correctional Center to interview Kendrick, who was serving a 20-year sentence. "We thought we had our break," said Detective Murray. Here was someone who knew the forest had been part of the search and had subsequently revealed criminal tendencies. The timing seemed perfect. Kendrick underwent 3 days of intensive questioning but maintained he had no knowledge of what happened to the missing hunters. Polygraph results were inconclusive, not unusual for a subject already incarcerated. The lead ultimately proved another dead end. The turn of the millennium brought renewed public interest when a true crime television series featured the case in a special episode titled "Vanished: The Hunters of Danville." The broadcast generated over 60 tips, each meticulously investigated. Most came from well-meaning viewers who had misinterpreted normal forest phenomena or confused the Walsh Moor case with other disappearances. However, one call proved noteworthy. An anonymous tipster claimed that a man in northern Ohio had boasted about taking care of two hunters who deserved it at a bar in early 1973. The caller provided enough details that investigators believed the information might be credible. After months of work, they identified the subject as Raymond Parsons, who had died in 1992. His connection to Danville was tenuous. He had worked briefly at a logging operation near the National Forest in the early 1970s. When detectives examined Parsons' history, they found a troubled man with a record of assault and weapons violations, but nothing that definitively linked him to Walsh and Moor. Without Parsons to question, and with no physical evidence, this lead too faded. In 2005, Sheriff Keith Bennett secured a federal grant for cold case investigation and allocated a portion to the Walsh Moor disappearance. This funding allowed for new forensic examination of items from the men's truck, using techniques that didn't exist in the 1970s. Trace evidence analysis revealed pollen patterns consistent with the northeastern section of the forest, aligning with the men's stated hunting location. More interestingly, soil samples from their truck tires contained mineral compositions not typically found in that area, suggesting they may have driven somewhere other than their reported destination before parking at the trailhead. That was significant, explained forensic geologist Dr. Nathan Wright. It indicated they might have gone elsewhere first, somewhere with different soil composition. But without more evidence, we couldn't determine where that might have been. The most technologically advanced search occurred in 2012, when the department partnered with a private aerospace company testing advanced thermal imaging drones. These devices could detect temperature variations in soil that might indicate disturbed ground, even decades later. For 2 weeks, the drones systematically surveyed 40 square miles of forest. The imaging identified several anomalies, all of which were carefully excavated. Investigators uncovered 2 previously unknown historic Native American burial sites, promptly secured and protected, the remains of an unreported plane crash from the 1960s, and numerous animal burials, but nothing related to Walsh and Moor. By 2015, the case had passed through the hands of 4 sheriffs, 12 lead detectives, and countless deputies. The evidence box had expanded to fill a cabinet, then a storage room. Technology had evolved from basic forensics to sophisticated DNA analysis, from paper maps to GPS tracking, from simple metal detectors to ground-penetrating radar. Yet the forest kept its secret. Perhaps most frustrating were the promising leads that materialized periodically, offering hope before evaporating. In 2008, a retired logger claimed he had information about the men's fate, but died of a stroke before meeting with investigators. In 2014, an anonymous letter arrived at the sheriff's office with a hand-drawn map marking an important location, which turned out to be nothing more than rocky terrain. Margaret Walsh and Willie Moore watched each development with a mixture of hope and heartbreak. They attended every press conference, studied every report, and maintained their own independent searches even as official efforts waxed and waned. This case powerfully demonstrates how technological advances transform cold case investigations. What was unsolvable in 1972 became solvable decades later through scientific progress. If you know someone fascinated by true crime, forensics, or cold case investigations, share this video with them right now. Your share might inspire the next generation of investigators who will solve tomorrow's seemingly impossible cases. By 2019, most people believed the mystery would never be solved. The original investigators had retired or passed away. Witnesses' memories had faded. Even Margaret and Willie had begun to accept they might never know the truth. Then came the breakthrough that would change everything. October 16, 2019 dawned crisp and clear in Danville, a perfect Michigan autumn day with leaves at their peak color and the first hint of winter in the air. Detective Marcus Holloway hadn't been born when Walsh and Moore disappeared. At 38, he knew the case only as department legend. the unsolved mystery that haunted 3 generations of Crawford County law enforcement. What prompted the new search wasn't a dramatic tip or deathbed confession, but something far more mundane: bureaucracy. The county had received a federal land management grant requiring archaeological assessment before certain forest areas could be reclassified. Among those areas was a section of the northeastern Huron National Forest, including regions previously searched for Walsh and Moore. It wasn't even about the case initially, Holloway explained. It was routine land management. The universe has a strange sense of timing. The Crawford County Sheriff's Department partnered with Michigan State University's Forensic Archaeology Recovery Unit for the assessment. Dr. Samantha Reeves, the unit's director, had built her reputation recovering remains from disaster sites worldwide. Her team brought state-of-the-art equipment, including the soil site XR7, the most advanced ground-penetrating radar system available outside military applications. To understand the breakthrough, it's essential to understand how this technology differed from previous search methods. Early detection attempts in the 1970s relied primarily on visual inspection and rudimentary metal detectors. The 1989 university team used first-generation ground-penetrating radar, which could penetrate only 2 to 3 feet below surface level and produced grainy, difficult-to-interpret images. The 2012 drone survey utilized thermal imaging, which detected heat differentials but couldn't see beneath dense forest canopy or identify non-organic materials effectively. The soil site XR7, by contrast, represented a quantum leap forward. Dr. Reeves explained the technology in a subsequent press conference. This system combines multiple scanning technologies simultaneously. Traditional GPR sends radio waves into the ground and measures how they reflect back, creating images of subsurface objects. The XR7 adds multispectral analysis, density measurement, and AI pattern recognition that can differentiate between natural geological formations and man-made disturbances, even those decades old. Most importantly, the XR7 could penetrate up to 20 feet below ground level and generate 3-dimensional renderings detailed enough to identify objects as small as a coin. Previous technology would show you a blur or anomaly, said Dr. Reeves. The XR7 can tell you if that anomaly is a rock, a root system, or something man-made. It's like comparing a 1970s television to today's 4K displays. The assessment team began their survey on October 12th, methodically scanning predetermined sectors. They weren't looking for Walsh and Moore specifically. They were cataloging everything from Native American artifacts to geological formations for the land management report. By October 16th, they had reached a densely wooded area approximately 4.3 miles northwest of where the hunter's truck had been found in 1972. This location had been searched multiple times over the decades, most recently during the 2012 drone survey, which had noted no significant anomalies. It was mid-afternoon, recalled technician Jason Alvarez. We were all tired, just going through the motions. These surveys are tedious, walking in precise patterns while the equipment does its thing. Nobody expected anything dramatic. At 2:47 p.m., the soil site's alert tone sounded. The initial scan showed something unusual approximately 6 feet below ground level, an area of disturbed soil roughly 8 feet long by 4 feet wide, containing multiple density variations inconsistent with natural formation. The machine knows the difference between a 100-year-old tree root and something that doesn't belong, explained Alvarez. This definitely didn't belong. Dr. Reeves ordered a detailed scan, which took approximately 40 minutes to complete. The resulting 3-dimensional image appeared on their field monitors with unexpected clarity. The distinct outlines of what appeared to be 2 human-sized forms, alongside several smaller objects of varying density. Protocol required immediate notification of law enforcement. Detective Holloway arrived within the hour, followed by Sheriff Bennett and the county medical examiner, Dr. Vance Murphy. I remember standing there looking at those scan images, Sheriff Bennett later told reporters. After 47 years, we were staring at what could be the answer to Danville's longest-running mystery. The weight of that moment is hard to describe. The decision to excavate was made on site, Unusual for archaeological assessments, but justified given the potential connection to an open missing persons case. As daylight waned, portable lights were brought in, transforming the forest clearing into something resembling a film set. The excavation proceeded with painstaking care. Each layer of soil was removed systematically, screened, and documented. Progress was deliberately slow. What might take an hour with conventional equipment required 6 hours using archaeological techniques designed to preserve every possible scrap of evidence. At 11:38 p.m., the team uncovered the first tangible evidence, a decomposed canvas material identified as consistent with 1970s-era hunting gear. Shortly after midnight, they exposed metal objects, the corroded remains of what appeared to be 2 rifles. "That's when we knew," said Holloway. "This wasn't just some archaeological find. This was them." By 3:00 a.m., the team had exposed enough to confirm their discovery. Human remains positioned side by side in what appeared to be a deliberately created grave. The condition was consistent with nearly 5 decades of interment, largely skeletal with small amounts of preserved tissue in protected areas. What made the scene particularly baffling was the careful arrangement. This was not the chaotic aftermath of an accident or animal attack. The bodies had been placed deliberately, the rifles positioned alongside them with what investigators would later describe as ritualistic precision. "Whoever buried these men took time," noted Dr. Murphy. "They weren't hastily dumped. They were arranged. It was methodical." By dawn on October 17th, the excavation had revealed the full tableau. 2 sets of human remains, 2 hunting rifles, remnants of backpacks containing decomposed supplies, hunting knives, a compass, and, most significantly, a single brass shell casing found clutched in what would have been the right hand of one of the victims. "That shell casing became our Rosetta Stone," Holloway explained. "It wasn't just evidence, it was a message." Forensic examination would later confirm what investigators suspected immediately. These were the remains of Robert Walsh and James Moore. Dental records provided preliminary identification, later confirmed through DNA comparison with surviving family members. The condition of the remains told part of the story. Both men had sustained gunshot wounds, Walsh to the back of the skull, Moore to the chest. The wounds were consistent with high-powered rifle ammunition, similar to what the men themselves had been carrying. But it was the shell casing that provided the most puzzling element. Found clutched in Walsh's skeletal hand, it appeared to have been deliberately placed there after death. The casing wasn't from either of the men's rifles. It was from a different caliber weapon altogether. "It was like someone wanted us to find it," said Holloway. "Like they knew it would eventually be discovered and would tell us something important." The graves had been expertly concealed. Despite nearly 5 decades of searching, including multiple examinations of this very area, no previous effort had detected the burial site. The soil had been disturbed in a way that matched the surrounding forest floor, and young trees had been transplanted above the grave in a pattern that would appear natural as they matured. "Whoever did this knew the forest," noted Dr. Reeves. "They understood how to hide something so it would blend with the natural environment over time. This wasn't an impulsive crime. It was carefully executed and meticulously concealed." As news of the discovery spread through Danville on October 17th, the community experienced a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the men had finally been found, horror at the confirmation of foul play, and renewed grief as old wounds reopened. For Margaret Walsh, now 86, the discovery brought the closure she had sought for nearly half a century. "I always knew I'd find him," she told reporters, her voice steady despite her age. "I just didn't know it would take so long." Willie Moore, 85, stood silent at the excavation site, watching as his brother's remains were carefully removed for transport to the medical examiner's office. After 47 years of searching every weekend, his quest had ended just miles from where it began. "I must have walked past this spot 100 times," he said quietly. "He was here all along, waiting for us to find him." As the remains and evidence were transported to the state crime lab for detailed analysis, investigators faced a new challenge. After nearly 5 decades, who could they possibly hold accountable? And what had that single shell casing been meant to tell them? The answers would prove more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The remains of Robert Walsh and James Moore arrived at the Danville State Police Forensic Laboratory in Lansing on October 18, 2019. There, a team of specialists began the painstaking process of extracting 5 decades of secrets from bones, degraded tissue, and weathered evidence. Dr. Eliza Thornton, the state's leading forensic anthropologist, led the examination. "Cold cases this old present unique challenges," she explained. "Organic material breaks down, metals corrode, fabrics disintegrate. But they also tell stories, if you know how to listen." The preliminary findings confirmed what the excavation team had observed. Both men had died from gunshot wounds. Walsh had been shot once in the back of the head at close range, an execution-style killing. Moore had sustained 2 shots to the chest, with evidence suggesting he had been facing his attacker. "The positioning tells us this wasn't a hunting accident," Dr. Thornton noted. "The trajectory, powder residue patterns, and entry wounds all indicate deliberate homicide. Toxicology tests, though limited by decomposition, detected no substances that would have incapacitated the men. They had been alert when attacked. More telling was the lack of defensive wounds or signs of struggle, suggesting they likely knew their killer or had been caught completely by surprise. The rifles found with the bodies yielded crucial information. Both were loaded, but neither had been fired. The men had been armed but hadn't used their weapons to defend themselves. Soil deposits in the gun barrels indicated they had been placed in the grave after the men were already dead. Most significant was the brass shell casing found in Walsh's hand. Forensic analysis identified it as .30-06 Springfield ammunition, not matching either man's rifle. Under advanced microscopic examination, the casing revealed distinctive marking patterns created by the firing pin and ejector of the weapon that had discharged it. "Every firearm leaves a unique fingerprint on the casings it ejects," explained ballistics expert Kenneth Ramsey. "These markings are as distinctive as human fingerprints. If we found the weapon, we could match it with absolute certainty." But the most revealing evidence came from an unexpected source: the buried canvas tent. Though heavily degraded, sections had been preserved beneath the bodies where oxygen couldn't penetrate. Specialized luminol testing revealed blood spatter patterns invisible to the naked eye. "The blood patterns told the story," said Dr. Thornton. "Someone had entered the tent while the men were inside, likely sleeping. Moore was shot first, waking Walsh, who turned and was then shot in the back of the head as he tried to reach for his rifle. The careful burial suggested the killer had taken considerable time at the scene, digging a substantial grave, arranging the bodies, and concealing the site. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or panic. It was methodical. But who would want these men dead, and why place a shell casing in Walsh's hand? The breakthrough came when Detective Holloway decided to run the ballistic markings through every database available, including military records. The distinctive firing pin impression matched a type of rifle commonly used by specialized military units in Vietnam, a modified M1 Garand issued to long-range reconnaissance units. This connection prompted investigators to re-examine Walsh's military service. His Army Ranger unit had been involved in classified operations throughout Southeast Asia. Service records showed that in 1969, Walsh had participated in a controversial mission that resulted in civilian casualties. The incident had been largely buried by military authorities, but 4 soldiers from his unit had faced unofficial inquiries. One of those soldiers was Victor Mercer. Mercer had served alongside Walsh, then moved to Danville after his discharge in 1971, drawn by the same hunting opportunities that had kept Walsh in the area. He had participated in the original search for the missing hunters, even consoling Margaret Walsh during those first terrible weeks. In 1973, less than a year after the disappearance, Mercer had left Danville abruptly, citing a job opportunity in Alaska. He had maintained no contact with anyone from the town since. "We started digging into Mercer's life," Holloway explained. "Military records, employment history, property ownership, anything that might tell us where he went after leaving Michigan." The trail led to a remote cabin outside Fairbanks, Alaska, where Mercer had lived until his death from cancer in 2017. Local authorities, acting on Michigan's request, searched the property and discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards containing a modified M1 Garand rifle. Ballistic testing confirmed what investigators had suspected. The firing pin and ejector marks on Mercer's rifle perfectly matched the shell casing found in Walsh's hand. Among Mercer's possessions was a journal, hundreds of pages chronicling his thoughts over decades of isolation. The entries revealed a man consumed by what he called the incident in Vietnam, where he believed Walsh had sacrificed civilians to save their unit, then falsified reports to military command. The final piece fell into place when investigators located Thomas Reed, another veteran from the same unit, living in a VA facility in Oregon. Though suffering from advanced dementia, Reed had moments of clarity during which he confirmed the long-buried truth. The mission had gone wrong, civilians had died, and Walsh had taken actions that haunted everyone involved. Mercer couldn't let it go, Reed explained during a recorded interview. He talked about justice all the time, said Bobby had blood on his hands that would never wash off. The full story, pieced together from Mercer's journal, Reed's testimony and forensic evidence, painted a disturbing picture. Mercer had harbored growing resentment toward Walsh, believing he had escaped accountability for war crimes, while others carried the psychological burden. When Walsh and Moore went hunting that December, Mercer followed them, waiting for the perfect opportunity. The snowstorm provided ideal cover. He approached their camp at night, entered their tent, and shot Moore first, an innocent bystander in Mercer's twisted quest for what he perceived as justice. Walsh, awakened by the gunfire, was executed before he could defend himself. Mercer then buried the bodies in a location he knew well from his own hunting expeditions. The placement of the shell casing in Walsh's hand was his final message, what his journal called returning the bullet he deserved for what he did to those villagers. For nearly 5 decades, Mercer had lived with his secret in self-imposed exile, his journal entries revealing increasingly tormented thoughts about whether he had delivered justice or merely added to the cycle of violence. In the end, 3 men were casualties of a war that followed them home, observed Sheriff Bennett at the press conference announcing the resolution of the case. What happened in Vietnam didn't stay there. It echoed through decades and destroyed multiple lives. For the families, the truth brought a complex mixture of closure and fresh pain. Margaret Walsh struggled to reconcile the husband she had loved with the allegations about his military service. "I didn't know that man they described," she said. "I knew a loving father who had nightmares he wouldn't talk about." Willie Moore found a strange kind of peace. Jimmy was just in the wrong place with the wrong person, he reflected. It wasn't random. It wasn't his fault. Somehow that makes it easier to accept. On December 17, 2019, exactly 47 years after they disappeared, Robert Walsh and James Moore were laid to rest in Danville Cemetery. The funeral procession stretched for miles, including elderly veterans who had served with both men, former sheriff's deputies who had searched for them, and community members who had grown up in the shadow of their disappearance. Though Victor Mercer had died before facing legal justice, the resolution of the case allowed the community to finally close a wound that had never properly healed. The hunters of Danville were no longer missing. They were at rest, their story complete. In a private ceremony after the funeral, Margaret Walsh placed 2 items in her husband's casket, his Purple Heart medal and the shell casing that had finally brought him home. "Whatever happened over there, whatever he did or didn't do, he paid for it," she told her daughters. "Now it's time for all of us to find peace." The forest that had kept its secret for so long returned to silence. The grave site was marked as a historical location, a reminder of how long justice can take and how far its reach can extend. What's the weather like where you are right now? Drop it in the comments below. Here in Danville that December of 1972, it was a brutal blizzard that helped hide the truth. Nature becoming an unwitting accomplice to a crime that took half a century to solve. It makes you wonder how many other secrets are out there, waiting for the right technology, the right detective, or simply the passage of enough time to finally come to light. For Detective Holloway, the case represented both an end and a beginning. Cold cases are never really about the past, he reflected. They're about the present, about saying that time doesn't erase our commitment to the truth. No matter how long it takes, some answers are worth waiting for. The resolution of the Walsh Moore case reverberated far beyond the boundaries of Danville. For the families who had lived in limbo for nearly half a century, the truth, however painful, finally allowed them to move forward. Margaret Walsh, who had spent 47 years searching for her husband, experienced what psychologists call complicated closure, answers that resolve questions while raising new ones. In the months following the case's resolution, she sold the home she had maintained as a shrine to Bobby's memory and moved into a small apartment near her daughter Susan. "I kept everything the same for so long, thinking he might walk through that door," she shared at a community remembrance event. "Now I know he's not coming back, but I also know where he is. That's more than I had for most of my life." At 86, Margaret found unexpected peace in her final years. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in early 2021, 16 months after her husband was laid to rest. Her obituary noted that she had completed her life's mission by finding Bobby. Willie Moore's transformation was perhaps even more profound. After dedicating every weekend for decades to searching the forest, he suddenly found himself without purpose. Local veterans groups reached out, involving him in community service projects that channeled his dedication toward helping others. "I spent half my life looking backward," Willie reflected. "Now I'm trying to look forward with whatever time I have left." For law enforcement and forensic science, the case became an instant landmark in cold case methodology. The Danville State Police developed a training program based on the Walsh Moore investigation, emphasizing how technological patience, waiting for science to advance enough to solve seemingly unsolvable cases, can be as important as traditional detective work. Dr. Samantha Reeves published a series of academic papers on the application of multispectral ground-penetrating radar in cold cases, establishing new protocols now used throughout North America. The soil site XR7 technology that discovered the graves has since been deployed in dozens of long-dormant investigations, leading to resolutions in 17 previously unsolved disappearances across the country. Perhaps most significantly, the case highlighted how the psychological wounds of war can manifest in unexpected ways across decades. Veterans organizations cited the Walsh Moore case in successful lobbying for expanded mental health services for combat veterans, particularly those involved in classified operations where traditional support systems may be unavailable. Detective Marcus Holloway, who saw the investigation through to its conclusion, keeps a photograph on his desk, the excavation site where Walsh and Moore were finally found. "It reminds me that no case is truly unsolvable," he says. "Sometimes the answer is literally buried, waiting for us to develop the right tools to find it." In Danville, the annual Hunters Memorial Weekend now includes a remembrance ceremony for Walsh and Moore. Their story has become part of the community's identity, a reminder of both tragedy and perseverance. The forest where they vanished continues to draw hunters and hikers, though many still speak of feeling a solemn presence in the area where the men were found. Not a haunting, but a reminder that beneath the beauty of the wilderness, secrets may lie waiting to be discovered. As technology continues to advance, more families may find the answers that Margaret Walsh and Willie Moore waited a lifetime to receive. Each cold case solved ripples outward, affecting not just those directly involved, but entire communities and the very practice of justice itself. If you've made it this far, you're officially part of our true crime community. Your interest in these forgotten stories helps ensure they're never truly lost. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and check out our other videos for more solved mysteries that remind us it's never too late for truth to come to light. Until next time, remember that justice may be delayed, but with persistence and advancing technology, it need not be denied.